So the format, we're just going to very informally go through kind of the take-home points like we talked about from each of our sessions to share. We are going to try to write these down, have some great institutional memory, and I really want everybody to look at today as a starting point. That's what's really exciting. So I'm going to stay on the floor. We're going to have some time for questions potentially and observations at the end. But let's just go ahead and go down the line and share the reflections from your last hour and a half.
Well, no, I just really want to give so much credit to Terry Buckmiller, who really orchestrated this whole session. I was just saying, it's amazing the magic that happens when we just get into small groups and talk to each other. And what I would love to do now is think about how can we spread that magic beyond this room and kind of summarize the lessons or the next steps that kind of came up in each of these conversations. So I'm going to try to take a lot of notes as people are talking, and I will let Bharath get started with the 4-day work week, and then please feel free to speak up from the audience too. We're going to try to finish right at noon because I know people have flights to catch.
Thanks so much. So before I start with what we got out of our session, I want to say a little bit about what I got out of our session. And it is that we would all be so lucky to have a chief like Dr. Stylianos, because hearing how he put this into practice in his own group, honestly, inspiring. And the correct, the 4-day work week, which he instituted there. And of course, we acknowledge that not everybody has the benefit of someone at the helm of their group with that much humanity and vision. But what he said of how he did it was that he got everybody into a room in his division, and the phrase that he brought up, which I just think is so apt for this, is that sometimes it's easier to ask for forgiveness than to ask for permission. Because they decided that amongst themselves that this was taking care of themselves was a priority, and that they were going to be responsible and make it work and find ways to cover gaps, and essentially put it into practice. Now, as we discussed this, a few themes came up. And one thing to acknowledge is there's no one-size-fits-all. We wish there was. We wish there was a way to just say that, here's the blueprint for how to make this work in your group. But that's not the reality. That's not what it's going to be like. So then the question becomes, where are ways that we can start to chip away at the edifice of surgical practice, the way it's been inherited, to make change? And one way is data. We know that a tired surgeon is not an effective surgeon. We know that a tired, exhausted surgeon is not a safe surgeon. And for all of our institutions, safety and the quality of care that we deliver is increasingly apparent, and that should be something that's visible at the forefront of any hospital's culture. So even if it seems like an insurmountable ask that you could go back to your group and say, how do we carve out more time for ourselves? It should not be as difficult an ask to say, how do we ensure what is safest for our patients? And so a post-call day, it may be an excellent place to start. If there is institutional resistance, to say, well, listen, we can't have our surgeon that's been taking call all weekend long, we can't have her come in and be expected to work 8 hours the next day. Or the person that's been in house all night, we can't have him driving 2 hours to clinic to go. So start there and use that as a way to chip away and any resistance that you may face. But another aspect of it, I'd say, is if it seems like the logistics are so complex in your institution to try to figure out how a more reasonable framework could be arrived at, consider the use of an external consultant. You know, it's not a bad thing to get someone that, has the credibility, has the experience to be able to visit, look over the way you do things, and offers changes. Do not feel like you have to do all of that yourself. The barriers are also interesting to think about. One thing that I identified as a sort of theme is a resistance to teamwork, right? So even if your division chief is a little bit more resistant to this kind of idea, it says a lot when every other member of the group says this is something we want, this is something we need. Part of that is that the members of the team be able to rely on one another, be able to be willing to hand off cases, not be seen as dumping on one another. One barrier that I think came up at a couple of different sessions were folks where they felt that individual compensation is tied to individual productivity, and people would be competing for cases, competing for higher RVUs. I think we can all agree whether or not we work in that kind of model or whether or not we benefit from that kind of model, that is not a sustainable way for us to practice. We ought to practice as a group so that the burden can be shared, so that we can benefit. A rising tide will lift all ships. So overall, I think hopefully everybody that participated found it was a very useful and thought-provoking discussion.
So we were in the I shouldn't come to work today group. And we started off, I think 2 out of 3 times, but I'll do it in here just to see. So how many people in this room have had an IV put in to hydrate themselves so that they could continue working? All right, look around. All right, everybody repeat after me. That's not normal. Okay. So that was the first thing that we all began to realize. And I think a couple of key things, because we do feel sometimes there's nothing we can do about it. And one of the things that was said over and over again was, someone said, it's taken me so long to get deprogrammed. And we realized that we really all have been programmed to think, and it's historically evident why, that we must keep on working, that there's not ever another solution, there's not a way to think about this, right? Someone called it systemic gaslighting, which I thought was pretty profound, and it's compounded, no question, by the fact that individualism is a dominant social norm in the United States. We all do believe we're individually responsible for what we do, and therefore individually responsible for what doesn't work out. And so it is a cultural norm we have to overcome consciously. So that's one thing. The other thing is we all agreed that there's an unreasonable expectation on the part of the places we work on what we can provide. And that as soon as a group gets a little thin, like we may have an ideal way we can set it up, but as soon as somebody gets sick or leaves or whatever, nearly every group falls into a crisis. And that's because of the level of redundancy that's not there. So then there's the next step, which is where you go and you ask for redundancy, and they tell you that the institution is broke. And as someone clearly said, the money is there. Okay? This is a priority and I've said this to a lot of people, there's nobody evil in administration that comes to work and says, I'm going to go hurt surgeons today. But we set up systems and how the metrics we use and how we count things that make it extremely difficult when we go and say, hey, we need another person. Oh, we can't afford that. So the one thing that I got, and I think everyone did in our group, and I think he's already left, but I'm going to bring this up again, I think he brought it up in another group, was Brad Feltus, who in his new job, which is in Appalachia, and he's the chief, he defined an FTE for the 3 people in his group as 7.5 24-hour shifts a month. And anything they do on any other day is theirs. They can choose to come to clinic, they can choose to schedule elective cases, they can go fly fishing. Okay? So the 3 of them each take a week of the month. The other 3 weeks, they're off. They share that 4th week a little bit. But it's also a group culture where they say, this is how we are going to live. That it's more important to us to be able to take care of our patients the way we want to with this redundancy than it is to do something. Now, isn't that mind-blowing? I mean, 4-day work week, this is like the next step, right? But the key is that when he went, he said there was no, because this was the model and this is what it took to hire those people in that hospital, there was no pushback. So sometimes understanding that there is a model, instead of us trying to tweak this thing that's really broken to say, nah, we got to go to this whole other paradigm, and to see that it's worked by Steve's amazing leadership and now by what Brad told us, which is an even more radical step, I think it lets us go back and say, really? We're putting IVs in our own arms to work? We're coming to work with viruses that are going to infect the kids we're taking care of? This isn't normal.
So we were in the how to be a supportive colleague to the lactating surgeon. And first I'd like to thank President-elect Dr. Tracy, who came to our session and supported us in our discussion, but also it sounds like throughout his career as CMO and in other positions has done that for women, and I think that's really amazing for our leadership to be doing that, so thank you. We talked about many things, but even I think having Dr. Tracy there was a demonstration of when I told people that I was on this panel, a colleague said, "Why are you on that panel? You don't have kids." And I think that's the whole point of having our supportive colleagues, and we all know someone who has a child or has a partner who has a child at home, and it's not just women who need this support, it's also our male colleagues that may be up all night helping their partner with breast milk. So some things we talked about for the future is to develop an APSA toolkit of how I do it as a guide for surgeons returning to work, but also for institutions, division chiefs, and program directors of how we can be better supportive and get trainees or surgeons out of the operating room to pump every 3 to 4 hours or whatever they need for their own schedule with their lactating needs. And then we would challenge APSA leadership to endorse the recent ACS statement and be one of the surgery groups that support the statement that came out a few weeks ago. And then we'd also, in future directions, like to pair with AEP as well as program directors to get better awareness about this and how we can all support each other, just like, not coming to work when you're sick, but also being able to take that time and not feel guilty for leaving the operating room or having to find a partner or co-resident to come cover your 20 minutes case while you're having to break, scrub, and pump. So thank you.
Terry, thanks again for putting this together. This is such an interesting and diverse group of problems that we're addressing. So I wasn't in the meeting when these were assigned, so Terry gave me the insoluble problem of how to thrive in a toxic workplace. So I decided the best thing to do was share my grief with Bob Sowen and Helena Crowley. If you ever have a bad problem, please get Bob and Helena as your partners because they were brilliant. There are 4 principles that we discussed in our session today. When you're in a toxic environment, there can be a toxic individual or a system problem where the hospital leadership doesn't share the same goals that you do. So we talked about 4 principles. The first one was, what's your North Star? Identifying what is most important to you in the situation, whether it's a difficult patient, is the patient's safety the best, or is it a difficult work environment? Identify what's most important to you. The second item was deciding what was in your control or what was in your area of influence, and not spending time on areas of concern that you have no influence or control over. Focusing on control and influence, and sharing that potentially with a colleague to discuss it, to prepare you to refine your ideas as you step to the third principle, which is tell your story. Identify the facts that exist in the problem. Ask the leadership of the hospital or the offending person that you're working with what their story is. Help them understand. Tom was in one of our sessions and he said there is a 50% rule for all CMOs. When somebody is misbehaving, 50% of the time there is something that we don't know that is wrong in their life that we could potentially help them to address. So invite them to tell their story. Share with them your perspectives and concerns, and invite them to identify an area of mutual understanding that you can test solutions for. The third one, I guess, is make sure you have data and not opinion. It's so easy in these situations to resort to emotional violence or silence and just stay in an angry, quiet place as opposed to seeking common ground and solutions. We, as a threesome, would like to recommend to you that you read the book, Crucial Conversations. It has been around for many years. It is outstanding in helping solve problems. And thirdly, we would invite you to be aggressive in your feedback about the session. We're learning about this, and there's a lot that we could learn from the things that you noticed that we could use to help the Wellness Committee to come back next year and provide an even better product. This is a journey, and you're part of it. So thanks in advance for your feedback.
We were the onboarding new pediatric surgeons group, and first we wanted to remind everybody that there is a transition to practice task force that's led by Grace Mack, and they presented on Thursday, so I think you could probably look up the talk or their checklist of things to think about when you're onboarding. There are a couple of things on their last slide that I just want to highlight that resonated with me. One was about the need for, I guess what I would have called a clinical mentor. They called it either a case proctoring or a backup or case review kind of person, and what they said was that err on the side of being too available and almost intrusive. I would say also, to add to that, we talked about that in our room, sort of normalize that transition is happening, and you're not expected to just be fully independent with no help ever when you start. So it doesn't feel like judgment when you're coming in to be available for their case. The second thing is around group culture. So I liked what they said about giving the new partner expectations about resident responsibilities and needed levels of supervision to help them avoid any pitfalls that they might have faced, and agreeing to cover clinically while get settled because transitions are difficult. The third thing was about clinical or conflict resolution. They speak about how the division should present a unified front to other divisions and departments in the hospital, and that you should stand up and support your new partner. And finally, they talk about dealing with adverse events. I think that your first complication is just something that hits in a way that is different than when you were a trainee, and it's something that a lot of us don't talk about, but being there to support that person through that helps them be able to move forward and not internalize that failure as a judgment about who they are. Our room also talked about the onboarding of, and I would say the most important takeaway I'd say is just to recognize that that is part of the onboarding, that there's this whole side of your partner that that affect their ability to work with you, and your work affects their life at home, that you should recognize and try to support as well. We have a handout that Lauren if you'd like to pick it up. A list of different life that are worth considering in helping someone set up when they start practice. So financial, familial, all the things. So feel free to.
Does Hal want to come up? Oh, this is. Oh. Why don't you want to come up and tell us about the ergonomics?
So our room was in the ergonomic, talk about how to optimize ourselves. So earlier I discussed, like think about ergonomics for the body is like how the hardware work, and then we have the software. So for the ergonomic, we talk about understanding how the body and the optimal precision, how movement, how to set up the OR room, from lighting, equipment, monitor, OR table, think about your assistant and OR techs, so everybody in the room, how to optimize their position. We discussed about using some accessory that can help, like anti-fatigue mat, certain kind of loops, or the equipment that can hold the OR, the camera for you in the OR to avoid fatigues, using some of the retractor to increase exposure, and also reduce fatigue for your assistant or medical students. Implement break and micro break and into the OR, so long cases. After 2-3 hours, take breaks, unbreak, go to the outside, rehydrate, get some nutrition if needed, right? Some bathroom break, and then recovery. So we kind of, talk about some of the routine that we do in the OR. So before the OR, so ergonomic is not just in the OR, but before, during, and after. So thing that we do like warm up, right? Before the case, and then go to the OR, break. After a long day in OR, do a cool down period, and then think about how we optimize ourselves outside the OR. So some of that practice like conditioning, strength training, so that we can help prevent injury. As we get older, all of us get older, we will lose muscle mass and strength, and that can contribute to our pain and discomfort. And then we also talk about communication and kind of change the culture. So that start with ourselves and then go to the resident and the medical student. Normalize that being optimal in the OR it's almost like a right? It's not an option. So we have resident and student that they feel like in suboptimal condition, we should encourage them to speak up and teach them. And then lastly, I want to say that this is the hardware, right? But we need to make sure that our software also work with the hardware. So using mindfulness to understand how our body work, what position it's in. So we did some exercise on reset, some body awareness before the OR and during the OR. And hopefully that will optimize this equipment that we bring with us to the OR and everywhere.
All right, thank you so much to all the session leaders for all the work you did in the preparation and facilitating these conversations. I think every year coming back from APSA, I feel so energized because I get to connect with this great community. But this is just a whole new dimension of that because we haven't traditionally spent time talking about these really, really difficult problems. It's been mentioned a few times the number of tears shed during this meeting, not just this morning, but even throughout. I think just we're getting to a new level of connection. And I so appreciate Marion's leadership on the program committee and Dave Powell for creating the space within the program, even though, there were so many more people here than I thought there would be, which is fantastic. So again, I kind of started the session by saying, how do we share this feeling that we all experienced this morning in these small rooms and get the message out beyond here? And I think creating opportunities to continue to experience the community beyond the APSA meeting is something that I would love to continue. We've been doing these connect and share Zoom meetings with the ethics committee, and maybe we can revisit some of these topics. I would love to be able to provide more resources, whether it's the lactation support toolkit that was mentioned. One of the things I loved most about this morning is it didn't just feel like a gripe session. There were so many people that came to the table with personal stories of how they've solved what feels like these unsolvable problems. So I would love, Brad felt us to record a video vignette or a written summary of his story of how he made that miracle happen and successfully advocated for this very unique work week. Tara Liu from Geisinger has a pretty unique story about how she fashioned her work week or month to support her well-being. So maybe we'll be coming back to some of you who feel like you've solved these problems so you can record those experiences and share them. And maybe we can start to build a directory so we can reach out to each other, and that's, I think, another way to continue to build community and help each other solve problems. And I don't know that we really have time for questions because I think people have to get to flights, but if anyone has any quick comment they want to make, maybe stand up. But otherwise, just thank you so much to everybody for being here today and just for making this happen, and especially to Terry once again.